Hi, I'm going to take you on a guide through creating the ripples on our wave rig. So here's a quick peek at what this looks like. So what you can see is that the wave, the log is affecting the ripples at the wave. It's not perfect. We can definitely do with spending a little time refining what the settings exactly are. But the implementation workflow seems to be pretty good right now. So I'm going to go through the workflow for making this, bringing this into your scene, and then we can all refine the settings from there. So first of all, here's one I did earlier. So this is a cached geometry of the waves being affected. And this is running through the boss editor here, and I've got two solvers that are on and two solvers that are referenced but turned off. And what I'm going to do is show you how to set up two new solvers, because it's not actually very reliable just importing or referencing in everything in one fell swoop. So what we actually have to do is update the reference to the latest rig. Well, I'll go through it. So we'll start first of all. First things first, so this is the scene here, and what I'm going to do is roll this back to a previous version. So view versions, I'm going to roll back to this one before I implemented the ripples. Okay, that's downloading that now. If this takes a while, I'll just fast forward through it. Right, so we've got the old file. I'm now going to open that in Maya. Alright, so step one is just going to be updating the reference. So you go into the reference editor and you look for the waves, and the latest version of the waves is actually version 10. You can always tell this if you go into the tracker, the assets tab down here, and then I keep version numbers over here on the right. Some of them don't have published models, so they don't. You can just pick up the latest version that's there, full stop. But I just want to point out if it's that there's a number here for waves, number 10. And you can always just copy that, go over to here and see where that is. So down here we've got model 10. So really all you have to do is go into here and type in 10, like this. Interesting. That should just work. Not sure why that's not working. Okay, so I see what the problem is there. I've published version 10, but I haven't actually downloaded it myself. So I've just synced version 10, model 10 rather, and now I'm going to browse for that. Most of the time you can just tap in the number if you've already downloaded it. So what are we under? Props, wave rig, version 10, going to wave high. Okay, alright. There we go. So now we have the latest wave rig in there. That's interesting. There's already some boss animation on there. So then go to Effects, Boss, and you can see what's in here. Now we actually don't want anything that's currently in there active, so just turn these off. I haven't quite figured out when those things do and don't want to be active, but basically turn those off. We're just going to use the stuff that's in there as a reference for building a new one. So when you've got it in your scene, probably the first thing you want to do is just file this stuff. I usually take the wave rig and drop it into props, drop it in right there. But one thing I want to point out is that this one right here says don't move ripple flat geo. That means just what it says, don't move it, leave it there. This is the one object I'm going to say don't file, because I got some erratic, unpredictable results when I was trying to file that. So we can leave that one alone. But what we are interested in is the wave rig over here. Okay, so along with this, let's see what's next. replace the reference file, but don't do that. Right, now we're going to constrain the log. So inside, let's just find our log in the scene. Right, let's turn on the curves. And we're interested in this curve that's on the inside, just here. And we're going to constrain something to that. So let me just expose that here. And then inside this rig, you're going to find, I think it's called, here we go, is it the driver? There we go. This locator right here, let's see where that is in the scene. It's just a little object sitting in space at the moment. We want to constrain this locator, make that visible, to that controller up there. So obviously in this case, since I've exposed them, what I can do is I can just select this, then I can select this, and I'm going to do a parent constrain. Make sure maintain offset is off, so you want a direct constraint, and that will snap to that position. Now what you just did was you made an object follow it. Let me just show you what that was. So inside, down in the display layers, you should be able to find something called hide ripple geo. And let me show you what that looks like. Interesting, why can't I see that? Should be able to see that. Ah, there it is. Okay. So essentially what we have in here is there's a flat plane and there's a duplicate object, this influencer object, which is following the log. So what I mean is if I move the scene, you'll notice that whatever the log does, this object also does. Now it's doing it with an offset. It's designed to actually displace this flat plane over here in exactly the right way to then displace the curved plane over here. Sometimes there are going to be some scenarios where that doesn't work quite perfectly, but it will handle quite a few situations, I think, straight out of the box. So anyway, I'm going to turn that off for now, so we're not worried about that. Okay, so then what we want to do is create a new boss ripple node. Right, so that's pretty straightforward. We're going to select this do not move ripple geo down here, and we're going to create a new boss ripple node up here, like that. It's very straightforward. Then we're going to create a new boss wave node. Again, we select the flat plane over here, and we hit the second button over here. Right, those are the two key nodes that you're looking for. Next thing we're interested in doing is I'm going to create an influence object. So that's this thing here. We want to affect this first solver here. So with that first solver selected, I'm going to select this one, and then I'm going to hit this first button up here. Right, that's all the boss basics done. One of the weird things is you need this to be visible, so make sure that that's not hidden. By default, this process actually hides it, so it has to be unhidden. That's why we have a display layer down here. Funnily enough, turning it off in a display layer is fine, but actually having it hidden over here is not. So that was an oddity I discovered. Anyway, so everything's hooked up. Now the reason you'll find that we had some previous solvers in here is so that you can copy the settings. All you have to do is go to the attribute object, attributes for that node, take a look at the original, and we're going to just copy a few values. So we've got like 500, I'm going to take from here and I'm going to drop it into gravity 500. And then I've got wave height 600, I'm going to drop that into here, wave height 600. Just toggle between those. Any other major changes? I know there's a difference start frame, but we can solve that all in one fell swoop in a minute. So I am actually interested in I just double clicked on that clip to set my frame range, so I know I want this to be my first frame. Let's just do this a minute. And I can hit go to my first frame, start frame, set for all. Okay, so they should all be starting on frame 111 now. Now, really what you want to do actually, because this scene starts at 111, the smart thing to do is actually start the scene maybe 10 frames earlier, so that you've got a bit of a run up. What I might actually do for this scene is, because I know I'm going to be using this in a previous shot that starts over here at frame 1, so I might go to -10 and make this my start frame. There we go, for the whole sequence. And then what's my last frame for everything in the scene? 420. Make that 430, just to go a bit beyond. There we go. So now I've got a frame range that accounts for the entire 4 shots in my Maya scene. Okay. So then, next thing I want to do is make sure we've copied all those settings across. I think pretty good there. Right, and then there's actually a solver object over here. Pretty sure that the defaults are fine. Yep, we're good there. Okay, then we've got this one here. We want to copy down to this one, Spectral Wave. The main thing I changed there was the wave height. Looks like I made it 30. Seem to remember making this 20 in my previous one and it being a bit more reasonable. Don't worry about the craziness going on over there yet. What else have we got? Oh yes, and then gravity. We just increase the gravity, 10 times the gravity. There we go. Alright, so that's all the settings copied across. Let's just check my steps over here. Make record geo visible. Yes. Make influence object. Match settings from previous setting and now plus handles. Set start frame. That's it. Then we go back to the beginning of the scene. One of the tips I tend to do here is I turn everything off, turn it back on again, and then just, yeah, I do want that on. And then I'm going to cache all. It's now going to go through all the frames, starting with -10, and it's going to make a local cache. Now this is a trickier step in that by default it's going to put it in your project under cache boss scene. You can see it over here, and it's going to make it should be an EXR sequence that will cache it. I've found that there's some oddities here because Artella makes controls the read-write ability of your scene sometimes, that even though it says it's putting it there, it's actually putting it somewhere on your C drive. So that's something to look out for if you can't find your cache, but it seems to be working. When it's all cached, these are going to go green here, and then you can click on them again to not use the cache if you want to go back to re-simulating it. But essentially you end up with a sequence that's all cached, that you should be able to scrub backwards and forwards with, and then you can render it. You'll notice that sometimes the simulation seems to do quite spiky things, the geometry getting quite extreme in places, and it's actually not as bad as it looks, because as we have shown in the demo, in the render, everything's smoothed out in the final render. One of the things I'm trying to avoid it doing is having it go over the log, which is a bit tricky. It doesn't look terrible when it goes over the log, but I'm trying to avoid it because it's one of those things where it's less convincing to the audience. Like, you can have your wave undulating along the side of an object, and we get away with a lot there, but as soon as it goes over it, we're not leaving behind a damp patch or anything like that, so it's not as convincing. So I'm trying to avoid that, but it is proving to be tricky. And in all honesty, what I would love to do is spend a bit more time finding new settings that work even better for this. But the fact that there's some sort of interaction at all is really, really good. It's a lot better than nothing. I'm going to leave that to simulate, and eventually I can render that. Don't forget to save. Alright, and once it's finished caching, you can scrub through it. Now we've got a few erratic points later in the simulation. I'll have to see where that is in the actual scene. Right, yeah, that's kind of crazy. So fortunately, once you've got the simulation done, it's not that hard to dial it back. You can fairly easily just reduce the influence in a variety of different ways. I mean, for example, you could just literally reduce the wave height, and it reduces the wave height on certain things. Looking at that one here, actually, wave height. So, for example, I could take this down to 300, and it's a lot less intense. So if you get an overall quite intense result, that's a quick way to just reduce it. The tricky thing is it's reducing everything evenly. So you may find that those nice subtle ripples at the beginning of your scene are no longer all that visible, which is why we've got quite big values in here. But don't forget, it also renders with everything being rounded off. Let's see what that might look like, say about 400. Okay. Oh, got a bit of depth of field there. Wonder if we can do a render now and see how safe that is, shall we? What I'd like to do first though is just do a save. I'm going to put it into edit mode and then hit save. Now let's have a go at rendering a frame from this angle and see what that looks like. Okay, I'm going to select my camera, go up to redshift, render view. Just going to make sure I've got this camera selected, and hopefully it will render that view. There we go. It is a little bit more than I would like. So I would go in there and play with the settings afterwards, but essentially what you're looking at is interesting. It's turned on one of these other ones that we don't want, so make sure that this is turned off. There you go, because it's trying to add two on top of each other, so just make sure that that's off. Yeah, that's only there as a reference point. Yeah. Okay, so what else have we got here? Yeah. So essentially what you would do is you can go in and play with the settings on these. Now this one here, Spectral Wave, is just a general undulation. Honestly, you could turn it off and it would still look pretty good because we've already got a displacement in the shader. So if you just want to focus on the stuff that's actually being simulated, then this is the one you're interested in up here. And that's the one that maybe we drop the amount of wave height on that one and re-render it. See what that looks like. There you go, a little bit tamer. So you get the idea. There's definitely plenty of options to play around with on both here and on the solver object. I'm generally finding you don't have to change the solver too much, and then it's mostly this one. Okay, have fun with that.